What if I told you that saying no is the single best thing you ever did for your English? Not flashcards, not grammar drills, a tiny two-letter word you're terrified to use. I lived in America for years, smiling, nodding, saying yes to everything, and my ears stayed closed. My confidence shrank. Then one question from my child broke me open. This is the story of how boundaries trained my ears like a native, and how you can start today no matter how tired you are. The question that haunted me. Imagine you're sitting in a small kitchen in suburban America. The yellow light is soft. Outside, a police siren drifts by like familiar background music. You just put your kid to bed. Your husband is watching football in the living room. And you're staring at a cup of tea that went cold hours ago. You ask yourself, why am I so tired? I said yes to everyone today, but no one asked what I needed. That was me 3 years ago. I lived in America, the land of how are you? Where people don't actually want the answer. I thought I was happy. I had a kind American husband, a chubby toddler, a tiny rented house with a postage stamp front yard. But every night, after everyone fell asleep, I sat in that kitchen and felt like I was slowly dying. Not physically dying. The quiet death of someone who forgot their own voice. And the question that haunted me, the one I never dared to say out loud, was this: am I actually loving myself? Or am I just trying to please the whole world so they won't leave me? Sound familiar? Your brain has a weird mechanism. Psychologists call it the fawning response. Not fight, not flight, but please. Fawn to survive. In a new social environment, especially in a country like America where everything from how to line up to how much to tip is a mystery, your brain automatically switches to nod. Smile. Don't bother anyone. And I did that for 3 straight years. I said yes when my mother-in-law called and asked me to make a salad for family dinner, even though I'd just come home from an 8-hour shift. I said yes when a neighbor invited me for coffee at 7 a.m., even though I hadn't brushed my hair. I said yes when my husband asked, "Are you okay?" And I smiled, nodded, said everything was wonderful. Meanwhile, inside, my ears were buzzing. All the English I'd worked so hard to understand turned out to be just requests, favors, expectations. Here's the irony about learning English. You think your problem is vocabulary? Pronunciation? Grammar? No. Your problem is you're afraid to say no in any language. And when you can't say no in your mother tongue, you sure as hell can't say it in English. So you listen, but only to scan for threats, for something you have to agree with. You're not listening to understand. You're listening to survive. There's a fascinating study from UC Berkeley. When people are under chronic social stress, the auditory cortex actually shrinks in function. In plain English, the more anxious you are about pleasing others, the worse your ears work. Not deafness, filtering. You only hear words related to danger, disapproval, rejection, criticism. But regular conversations, laughter, the melody of language, they slip through your fingers like water. And that's exactly what happened to me. I remember one November afternoon. It was crisp and cool. I took my kid to the park. Another American mom started chatting with me. She spoke fast, real native speed, with those little connectors. You know, I nodded and smiled for 15 straight minutes. When I got home, I couldn't remember a single thing she'd told me. I only remembered saying yeah and really like a parrot. That night, I cried in the bathroom. Not because I didn't understand English. Because I realized I wasn't even myself anymore. You know what? In America, they teach kids to say no very early. No, thank you. I don't want to. Please stop. That's not rude. That's boundaries. But I grew up in a culture where no meant you're being difficult. I carried that invisible armor of fake niceness all the way across the ocean. And that armor, it turns out, was the thing plugging my ears. The haunting question grew louder. Does loving yourself mean learning to say no? I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing. If I never answered that question, I would forever be a nodding person in an English-speaking world. And my ears would stay closed forever. Then one day, everything changed. Not because of a book. Not because of a course. But because of another question from my own child. And that story, that's what I'll tell you next. When yes became a prison. Let me describe a typical Tuesday from my yes era. Wake up at 6:30 a.m. Because my daughter decided the sun is a personal invitation to jump on my face. Make breakfast, scrambled eggs, but she wants pancakes. Say yes to pancakes. Burn the first one. Say yes to making a second batch. My husband asks if I can drop off his dry cleaning because he has an early meeting. Say yes before my brain even processes the request. Get in the car. Drive past the dry cleaners because I was thinking about the grocery list. Realize my mistake. Turn around. Say yes to the extra 15 minutes of traffic. By 10 a.m., I've already said yes to 11 things. 11. None of them were for me. Here's what's fascinating about the word yes, and I learned this from reading a pile of psychology books while hiding in my closet. Don't ask. Your brain releases a tiny hit of dopamine when you agree with someone. It's a social bonding chemical. Back in caveperson times, agreeing with your tribe meant you didn't get left outside for the saber-toothed tigers. So your brain is literally wired to say yes as a survival mechanism. The problem? Modern America is not a cave. And saber-toothed tigers don't exist. But your brain doesn't know that. So there I was, a walking dopamine addict, saying yes to everything like a human stamp machine. Can you bring snacks to the playdate? Yes. Can you help me move this couch on Saturday? Yes. Can you work the school bake sale, even though you've never baked a cookie in your life? Yes, yes, yes. And my English listening? It was collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. You see, listening comprehension isn't just about your ears. It's about your brain's available bandwidth. Every time you say yes to something you don't actually want to do, your brain shoves that commitment into your working memory. It sits there like an uninvited guest, tapping its foot, taking up space. Scientists call this cognitive load. I call it the mental equivalent of trying to fold laundry while someone keeps handing you more socks. By the end of my yes days, my cognitive load was so heavy that I couldn't process simple English sentences anymore. Someone would ask, "Do you want paper or plastic?" And I'd just stare at them like they'd asked me to solve a calculus problem. My husband would say, "The trash needs to go out." And I'd hear, "The trash needs to something," because my brain had already shut down the listening department to save power for the 17 other obligations I'd agreed to. I remember one specific afternoon that still makes me cringe. I was at Target, the sacred American temple of cheap everything. A cashier, probably 17 years old, with pink hair and the energy of someone who'd rather be anywhere else, asked me, "Did you find everything okay?" A simple question. A scripted question. Every American hears it 100 times a year. But my brain was so fried from saying yes to a morning of chaos that I just froze. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Then I said, "Yes, no. I mean the thing." The poor cashier looked genuinely concerned. I paid and ran to my car. Then I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, breathing like I'd just finished a marathon. That's the thing nobody tells you about learning English as an adult in America. It's not the big words that kill you. It's the tiny, everyday interactions when you're already exhausted from carrying everyone else's yes on your back. There's a name for what I was doing. Psychologists call it overfunctioning. It's when you take responsibility for other people's feelings, tasks, and problems, not because you wanna, but because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. Overfunctioners are the people who always bring the dip to the party, always say no problem when it's actually a huge problem, and always end up crying in the bathroom at family gatherings. Sound like anyone you know? Here's the killer part. Overfunctioning makes you worse at English, not better. Because language learning requires underfunctioning in some areas. You need empty space in your brain to absorb new sounds, new patterns, new rhythms. You need boredom. You need silence. You need to stare at a wall and let your auditory cortex do its job. But when you're running on a treadmill of yes, playdates, dry cleaning, pancakes, couch moving, bake sales, there's no space. Your brain is a hoarder's apartment with no room for new furniture. I didn't realize any of this at the time. I just knew I was tired. Bone tired. The kind of tired where you sit down to pee and almost fall asleep. The kind of tired where you open the refrigerator and forget why you're there. The kind of tired where your daughter asks, "Mommy, what's this word?" And you look at a simple 3-letter word like cat, and for one horrifying second, you don't recognize it. That happened. I'm not exaggerating. I looked at the word cat in a children's book and my brain gave me nothing. Just white noise. Like someone had unplugged the English department and forgotten to plug it back in. And in that moment, I finally understood something terrible and liberating at the same time. My problem wasn't my English level. My problem was that I had said yes so many times to so many people that I had no yes left for myself. And without a yes for yourself, your brain just checks out. It stops listening. It stops learning. It stops caring. I went home that night and wrote on a sticky note, "Every yes to someone else is a no to yourself." I stuck it on the bathroom mirror. My husband saw it and asked what it meant. I wanted to explain, but the words wouldn't come, because I still didn't know how to say what I really needed to say. Not yet, but that was about to change. The American culture of nice. Here's something nobody warned me about before I moved to America. Americans are aggressively nice. Not fake nice like some places where people smile and then talk behind your back. I mean genuinely, enthusiastically, almost terrifyingly nice. A cashier at Walgreens once told me she loved my earrings, asked where I got them, said they reminded her of her aunt's earrings from the 90s, and then thanked me for coming in with the energy of someone who just won the lottery. I stood there like a deer in headlights. Is this normal? Yes. This is normal. But here's the twist. Americans are also crystal clear about their boundaries. They'll invite you to their barbecue with the warmest smile you've ever seen, and then 2 hours later, they'll say, "Okay, we're going to wrap things up now. Thanks for coming." And they mean it. No guilt. No lingering. No silent resentment because you stayed too long. They just stop. My husband does this at parties. He'll turn to me mid-conversation and say, "I'm socially done. Let's go." And we go. My brain still hasn't fully accepted that this is allowed. Now, contrast that with how I was raised. Where I come from, no is a negotiation. You say no 3 times and then you say yes to be polite. You linger at the door for 45 minutes saying goodbye. You eat food you don't want because refusing is rude. You stay at a party until the host yawns because leaving first is abandonment. This is not wrong. It's just different. But when you transplant that brain into American soil, something breaks. I remember the first time a neighbor said to me, "I'd love to hang out, but I need some alone time this weekend." Rain check. My jaw almost hit the sidewalk. She said she needed alone time. Out loud. To my face. Without apologizing. Without making up a fake excuse about a sick aunt or a broken dishwasher. Just pure, unfiltered honesty. And you know what happened? Nothing. We're still friends. We had coffee the next week. The world did not end. I went home and thought about this for 3 days straight. Because if an American can say, I need alone time, without losing a friendship, then why was I killing myself saying yes to everything? Why was I showing up to every potluck, every play date, every random request like an unpaid personal assistant to the universe? The answer I discovered is cultural conditioning. And there's actual science behind this. Psychologists talk about interdependent versus independent self-construal. Big words, simple meaning. In cultures with interdependent self-construal, like where I grew up, your identity is tied to your relationships. Saying no feels like cutting a thread that holds you together. In independent cultures like the US, your identity is separate. Saying no is just a preference. It's not personal. It's just a sentence. The problem is that I was living in an independent culture with an interdependent brain, and my English listening was suffering because of it. Here's why. When you're constantly scanning for social cues, did I offend them? Should I have said yes? Are they mad? You're not listening to the actual words. You're listening to the emotional weather. Your ear is tuned to the slightest shift in tone, the smallest sigh, the tiniest pause that might indicate disappointment. And that's exhausting. It's like trying to listen to a podcast while also watching a silent movie and solving a Rubik's Cube. Your brain just gives up. I noticed this most clearly at parent-teacher conferences. My daughter's preschool teacher, a sweet woman named Mrs. Peterson, would say something like, she's doing great with letter recognition, but we're working on sharing during free play. And I would hear, your child is a monster. You're a bad mother. Everyone is judging you. Why? Because my brain was translating every neutral American statement into the emotional language of my home culture, where indirect criticism is delivered through 1,000 small hints. Mrs. Peterson wasn't hinting. She was just stating a fact. But I couldn't hear the fact. I could only hear the fear. There's a name for this in linguistics. It's called pragmatic transfer, when you carry the unspoken rules of your first language into your second language. And let me tell you, it's a silent killer of listening comprehension. Because you're not just decoding words. You're decoding an entire cultural operating system that doesn't match the one you were born with. I started paying attention to how Americans actually use the word no. And I noticed something beautiful. They wrap it in kindness, but they keep it clear. No, thank you. I appreciate the offer, but I can't. That doesn't work for me. I'm going to pass this time. None of these phrases feel mean. None of them burn bridges. But they all do one thing. They protect the speaker's time and energy. And here's the kicker. Americans respect you more when you use them. Because it shows you have a spine. It shows you know what you want. And that, weirdly, is considered polite. My husband once told me, honey, when you say yes to everything, you're actually being rude. Because you're not being honest. And people can feel that. I wanted to strangle him for about 3 seconds. Then I realized he was right. My yes had become meaningless. It was just a sound I made to end conversations. It had no weight. No truth. No love. And that's when the question shifted. It wasn't how do I learn English anymore. It was how do I learn to say no in English without feeling like I'm committing a crime? I didn't have an answer yet, but I had a clue. And the clue was sitting on my bathroom mirror, written on a sticky note, getting more faded every day. Every yes to someone else is a no to yourself. I was about to find out what happens when you flip that equation around. Love without borders is not love. Let me tell you about the fight that almost broke my marriage. Not a screaming, plate-throwing fight. We don't do that. We're both too polite for that. It was the quiet kind of fight. The kind where you say, I'm fine, in a voice that means anything but fine. The kind where you sit on opposite ends of the couch pretending to watch Netflix while actually rehearsing arguments in your head. The kind that lasts 3 days because neither of you knows how to say what you actually mean. It started with something stupid. It always does. My husband, bless his American heart, came home from work and said, "Hey, my mom is coming over for dinner tonight. Is that okay?" And I said, "Sure." But here's what I didn't say. I'm exhausted. I haven't showered. The house looks like a toy bomb exploded. I was planning to spend my evening doing absolutely nothing, and that nothing was sacred to me. Instead, I spent the next 3 hours cleaning, cooking, and smiling. My mother-in-law came. She's lovely, genuinely. She brought wine and told funny stories about my husband as a teenager. Dinner was fine. Everyone was happy. Except me. I was a hollow shell with a frozen smile, nodding along, refilling water glasses, dying inside. After she left, my husband said, "That was nice." "Thanks, babe." And something in me snapped. Not dramatically. Just a small crack. I said, "Next time, can you ask me before you invite people?" He looked confused. I did ask. You said yes. I said yes, because I didn't know how to say no. He stared at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language, which technically I had. I was speaking the language of someone raised to say yes first and process feelings later. He was hearing the language of someone who believes yes means yes, no means no, and everything else is passive-aggressive nonsense. That fight lasted 2 days. We didn't yell. We just circled each other. He felt blindsided. I felt invisible. And somewhere in the middle of night too, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrible. I had been treating love like a borderless country. No boundaries. No checkpoints. No, you can't come in right now. Just open access, 24/7, to anyone who asked. And that's not love. That's a hostage situation. There's a concept in psychology called codependency. You've probably heard it before. But let me describe what it actually feels like. It feels like your happiness depends entirely on other people's moods. If they're happy, you're safe. If they're upset, you're drowning. You say yes not because you want to, but because you're terrified of the alternative, disappointment, conflict, abandonment. Your yes is not a gift. It's a ransom payment. I was codependent. There, I said it. I had built my entire American life around making sure no one ever felt uncomfortable because of me. And in doing so, I had made myself incredibly uncomfortable all the time. My husband didn't even know. How could he? I never told him. I just smiled and nodded and secretly resented him for not reading my mind. Here's the science part. Researchers have found that codependency activates the same neural pathways as addiction. The temporary relief you feel when someone says thank you or you're so helpful is a small dopamine hit. And like any addiction, you need more and more to feel the same effect. So you say yes to bigger things, more things, harder things, until you're completely depleted and still craving that next hit of approval. And here's where English comes back into the picture. Because when you're codependent, your listening skills are garbage. Not because your ears are broken. Because you're not listening to what people are saying. You're listening for how they feel. Every sentence becomes an emotional radar scan. Is she annoyed? Does he need something? Did I do something wrong? Your brain is so busy managing other people's emotional states that it has zero bandwidth left for processing vocabulary, grammar, or accent. I noticed this most clearly during a conversation with my husband about something simple. What to have for dinner? He said, "How about tacos?" A normal person would hear, "How about tacos?" I heard, "I really want tacos, and if you say no, you're rejecting me and then you'll feel guilty, so you should just say yes." But also maybe he's just asking and you're overthinking everything. Oh my God, why is this so hard? All of that from one word, tacos. That's not listening. That's anxiety, wearing a listening costume. And it's exhausting. It's also completely unnecessary. Because my husband wasn't sending any of those hidden messages. He just wanted tacos. That's it. Tacos. The turning point came when I finally said something terrifying. After 2 days of the silent fight, I sat him down and said, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not fix it. Just listen. He nodded. Americans are good at this, I'll give them that. I said, I've been saying yes to things I don't want to do. Not because I'm lying. Because I don't know how to say no without feeling like you'll love me less. And that's not your fault. It's mine. But I need to learn how to say no. And I need you to not get mad when I do. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Why would I get mad? Because you might not get what you want.
He thought about that.
Then he said something I will never forget. I'd rather hear no than hear a yes that isn't real. A fake yes feels like a lie. A real no feels like respect. And just like that, the border opened, not to let everything in, but to let something out, the truth. That night, I realized that love without borders isn't love at all. It's a performance. And performances are exhausting to maintain. Real love needs fences.
Not to keep people out, to keep yourself in.
I still didn't know how to say no, but I had just taken the first step. I had admitted that I needed to learn, and that, my friend, is where the real work began. The mirror moment with my child. Let me tell you about the sentence that changed everything. It wasn't spoken by a therapist, a life coach, or a wise old monk on a mountaintop. It was spoken by a 4-year-old with peanut butter on her cheek and one shoe missing, because there's always one shoe missing. It was a Thursday. A nothing Thursday. The kind where you've already given up on the week, but Friday is still teasing you from a distance. I was making lunch, another round of scrambled eggs, because my daughter had decided eggs are the only acceptable food group. She was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing something that looked like a potato with eyes. I was exhausted. Not the dramatic kind of exhausted. The boring kind. The kind where you feel like you're wading through wet cement just to reach the refrigerator. Then I dropped a spoon. And I said, Oh, sorry. Not to anyone. Just to the universe. Just a reflex. Like blinking or breathing. I apologized for dropping a spoon. A spoon. An inanimate object made of metal that has no feelings and certainly no expectation of an apology. My daughter looked up from her potato drawing. She tilted her head, the way only small children can, like she was about to ask something profound. And then she said, in her small, peanut buttery voice, Mom, why do you always say sorry? I froze. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower started. Time did that weird thing where it slows down and speeds up at the same time. What do you mean, baby? She shrugged. You say sorry for everything. Sorry for the spoon. Sorry for the door. Sorry for the car. Sorry when daddy comes home. Sorry when grandma calls.
Why?
I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because I had no answer. Or rather, I had too many answers, and none of them were appropriate for a 4-year-old. Because I was raised to take up as little space as possible. Because saying sorry is easier than saying no. Because I'm afraid that if I stop apologizing, someone will realize I'm not actually sorry, I'm just exhausted. Because I've forgotten the difference between an apology and a greeting. Instead, I said, That's a really good question. Let me think about it. And I did. I thought about it for the rest of the day. I thought about it while folding laundry. I thought about it while pushing the swing at the park. I thought about it while brushing my teeth that night, staring at my own face in the mirror, toothpaste dripping down my chin. My 4-year-old had just diagnosed a problem I'd been avoiding for 30-something years. I apologized for existing, for taking up space, for having needs, for dropping spoons. And here's the thing about apologizing. It's not just a word. It's a posture, a way of moving through the world that says, I'm sorry for being here. Please don't be annoyed. Please don't leave. And what was I teaching my daughter? That's the question that hit me like a truck backing up without a beeper. What was I teaching her every time she heard me apologize to her father for asking him to take out the trash? What was I teaching her every time she watched me say sorry to a telemarketer for not being interested? What was I teaching her about her own future voice? There's a concept in developmental psychology called social referencing. It's how children learn what's normal by watching the adults around them. A baby falls down. Before crying, they look at their parent's face. If the parent looks scared, the baby cries. If the parent smiles, the baby gets up. Children are emotional weather vanes and parents are the wind. My daughter was watching me, and she was learning that women apologize, that women say sorry for spoons, that women shrink, that women take up less space than men, less space than guests, less space than spoons. She was learning that sorry is the background music of a female life in America, not because anyone forces it, but because we've been humming it so long we forgot we could stop. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in bed replaying every sorry I'd said in the past week. The count was somewhere around 47. 47 apologies for things that required no apology. 47 tiny cuts to my own dignity. 47 lessons I was teaching my daughter without saying a word. The next morning, I did something uncomfortable. I sat my daughter down at the breakfast table. Eggs again, she won, and I said, "Remember yesterday when you asked why I say sorry all the time?" She nodded, mouth full of egg. I think, I say sorry because I'm scared. But I don't want to be scared anymore. And I don't want you to be scared either. So I'm going to try something. I'm going to try to say no more. And thank you more. And only say sorry when I actually do something wrong. Okay? She looked at me. Then she went back to her eggs. 4-year-olds are not known for their emotional follow-through. But I meant it. And meaning it was the first real step. Here's where the English piece comes back in. Because sorry had become my default English response to everything. Not because I was genuinely sorry. Because it was safe. It was a verbal shield. Sorry ended conversations. Sorry made people nod and move on. Sorry required no follow-up, no boundary, no truth. But sorry was also making me deaf. Because when you're constantly apologizing, you're not listening. You're rehearsing your next apology. You're waiting for your turn to say sorry again. You're not present. You're not curious. You're just sorry. That morning at the kitchen table, with egg on my daughter's face and a broken spoon on the floor, I made a decision. I would stop apologizing for existing. I would learn to say no. In English, clearly, without the sorry chaser. I would teach my daughter that her voice matters by finally using my own.
It took time.
It took practice. It took saying no to things I would have said yes to before. And every time I did, I felt a little more alive. A little more real. A little more like someone my daughter could actually look up to. The mirror moment had passed, but the reflection had changed. And the real work was just beginning. Boundaries are not walls, they're doors. Let me clear something up right now. When I say boundaries, I don't mean building a fortress around yourself with armed guards and a moat full of alligators. I'm not talking about becoming cold, distant, or unreachable. That's not a boundary. That's a prison with better landscaping. Here's what I used to think boundaries were. I thought they meant telling people, leave me alone forever, and slamming the door. I thought they meant being rude, ungrateful, and selfish. I thought they meant becoming the kind of person who says no to helping a friend move because my time is valuable in that insufferable LinkedIn influencer voice. So, I did what any reasonable people pleaser would do. I avoided boundaries entirely. Because if boundaries are mean and I don't want to be mean, then I will simply have no boundaries. I will be a human welcome mat. Walk all over me. I'll just say thank you for the footprints. But here's what I learned slowly and painfully, like learning to ride a bike on gravel. Boundaries are not walls. Boundaries are doors. A wall says, you can never come in. A door says, you can come in, but here's how. Knock first. Wait for an answer. Respect the hours. A door lets people in, but on terms that keep you safe, sane, and still standing. I discovered this concept in a book I read while hiding in my car during my daughter's piano lesson. Piano lessons are 30 minutes of sitting in a parking lot wondering what to do with yourself. Highly recommended for introspection. The author said something that hit me like a bag of frozen peas falling out of the freezer. Boundaries are the distance where I can love you and me at the same time. That's it. That's the whole thing. Boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about creating enough space so that you don't resent the people you love. Because here's the truth, and it's an ugly truth. You will eventually hate anyone you can't say no to. It might take years. But the resentment will grow like mold in a damp basement. Quiet. Invisible.
Toxic.
I thought I was being loving by saying yes to everything. But I was actually planting little seeds of resentment every single time. Yes, I'll make the salad. Seed. Why doesn't she ever ask anyone else? Yes, I'll watch your dog for the weekend. Seed. He knows I hate dogs. Does he even care? Yes, I'll stay late at work. Seed. They don't pay me enough for this. By the time my daughter asked me why I always say sorry, that basement was full of mold. And the mold had a name. Resentment disguised as generosity. Now, let's bring science into this, because science makes everything more real. Researchers have studied what happens to your nervous system when you violate your own boundaries. It's called emotional dissonance, the gap between what you feel and what you express. And your body hates that gap. It releases cortisol, the stress hormone. It keeps your sympathetic nervous system activated, which means you're constantly in low-grade fight or flight mode. Your heart rate stays elevated. Your digestion gets weird. You feel tired but can't sleep. Hungry but don't want to eat. Your body is screaming something is wrong, while your mouth is saying, everything is fine. That was me. Every day. For years. And here's where English enters the picture again. Because emotional dissonance is the enemy of language learning.
Why?
Because your brain cannot process new linguistic information when it's busy managing internal chaos. It's like trying to read a book in a burning building. Technically possible. Practically stupid. I noticed this when I started paying attention to my listening comprehension on days when I had said yes to something I didn't want to do. On those days, my English was garbage. I would miss entire sentences. I would ask people to repeat themselves 3 times. I would nod and smile and have absolutely no idea what they just said. On days when I had honored my own needs, even in small ways, my listening was sharp. I caught jokes. I understood movie dialogue without subtitles. I heard the difference between I'm fine and I'm fine, with that specific tone that means the opposite. The correlation was undeniable. Boundaries equals good listening. No boundaries equals listening like a wet paper towel. So I started small. Tiny. Microscopic. I didn't try to say no to big things. I didn't tell my mother-in-law I'm not making the salad because that would have given me a heart attack. I started with things so small they barely counted. Can you pass the salt? I paused for 1 second before passing it. Just 1 second. To acknowledge that I had a choice. Do you want to watch this movie? I said, let me think about it for 5 seconds instead of immediately saying yes. Can you help me with this? I said, yes, but only for 10 minutes, instead of an open-ended yes that would swallow my whole afternoon. These were not heroic acts of boundary setting. They were the emotional equivalent of lifting a 1-pound dumbbell. But something shifted. Each tiny boundary was a small door I opened.
Not to keep people out.
To let my true self in. And here's the miracle. Nobody died. Nobody stopped loving me. My husband didn't file for divorce. My mother-in-law didn't disown me. My daughter didn't lose respect for me. In fact, the opposite happened. People started treating me better. Because when you act like your time matters, other people start believing it too. I remember the first time I said to a friend, I can't talk right now. Can I call you back in an hour? She said, of course. Thanks for being honest. That was it. No drama.
No guilt.
Just a door, opening and closing gently. I started to realize that boundaries aren't selfish. They're the most loving thing you can do. Because they allow you to show up fully when you do say yes. A yes without boundaries is a weak yes. A yes with boundaries is a powerful gift. And my ears, they started to open. Really open. Not because I was studying harder. Because I wasn't fighting myself anymore. The internal noise quieted down. And for the first time since moving to America, I could actually hear. Not just the words. The music underneath. The first no that changed everything. Now comes the part where I tell you about the scariest 2 seconds of my adult life. And no, it wasn't giving birth. It wasn't a car accident. It wasn't getting lost in a bad neighborhood at midnight. It was saying one tiny word to a friend who asked me for a favor. One word. 2 letters.
Annie. Ah.
Let me set the scene. Her name is Sarah. Not her real name, because I'm not a monster. Sarah is the kind of American friend every immigrant dreams of having. She speaks slowly when I need her to. She doesn't correct my grammar unless I ask. She invited my family to her Thanksgiving dinner when we had nowhere else to go. Sarah is a good person. A really good person. Which made what I was about to do feel like treason. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My daughter had a fever. Not a scary fever. The kind where they're slightly warm and extremely dramatic about it. She was lying on the couch watching Frozen for the 17th time, wrapped in a blanket like a tiny burrito. I was exhausted. The kind of exhausted where your bones feel like they're made of wet cardboard. My phone buzzed. Sarah. Hey. I know this is last minute, but could you pick up my son from soccer practice at 4? I'm stuck at work. It's on your way home, I swear. Let me know. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. My brain did what it always did, the automatic calculation. Can I do this? Yes, technically. I have a car. I know where the soccer field is. My daughter has a fever, but she can sit in the car for 20 minutes. It's fine. Just say yes. Say yes. Say. And then I stopped. I remembered the sticky note on my bathroom mirror. I remember my daughter's question. Why do you always say sorry? I remembered the feeling of being a hollow shell at the end of every day, wondering where my life had gone. I remembered that every yes to someone else was a no to myself. My heart started racing. My palms got sweaty. This is not an exaggeration. My body was reacting like I was about to jump out of an airplane, which, in a way, I was. I was about to jump out of the airplane of people-pleasing and hope the parachute opened. I typed. Deleted. Typed again. Deleted again. My daughter asked, Mom, are you okay? I said, Fine, baby, just texting.
I was not fine.
I was having a physiological response to the prospect of disappointing someone. There's actually a name for this. Psychologists call it rejection sensitivity. Your brain processes social rejection the same way it processes physical pain. Same neural pathways. Same agony. Which means that saying no to a friend literally hurts. Not metaphorically. Actually biologically hurts. But here's what I've learned since then. The pain of saying no lasts about 2 minutes. The pain of never saying no lasts a lifetime. I took a breath, and I typed, "I'm so sorry, Sarah, but I can't today. My daughter has a fever, and I'm really wiped out. Hope you find someone else." Then I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling, waiting for the world to end. 30 seconds passed. Then my phone buzzed again. I picked it up with trembling hands. Sarah's message. "No worries at all. Thanks for being honest. Hope she feels better. I'll figure it out." That was it.
No explosión.
No guilt trip. No passive-aggressive, must be nice to say no. Just a normal, healthy American response from a normal, healthy American friend. She meant it. I could tell. Because Sarah had boundaries of her own. She said no to people all the time. And she still had friends. She still had a life. She still had people who loved her. I sat on the couch and cried. Not sad tears. Relief tears. The kind of tears that come after you've been holding your breath for 3 years and finally let it out. My daughter crawled over and put her warm little hand on my arm. "Mom, why are you crying?" "Because I just did something very brave." "What did you do?" I said no. She thought about this for a moment. Then she said, "Can I have a popsicle?" 4-year-olds are not deep. But the moment was deep enough for both of us. Here's what I learned from that 2-second text message. Saying no doesn't destroy relationships. It clarifies them. The people who get angry when you set boundaries are the people who were benefiting from you having none. And those people? They were never your real friends anyway. Real friends say, "No worries. Thanks for being honest." Real friends want the real you, not the exhausted, resentful, secretly dying version. Sarah and I are still friends. Closer than before, actually. Because now when I say yes to her, she knows I mean it. My yes has regained its value. It's no longer monopoly money. It's real currency. And my English? Something shifted that day too. Because after I sent that message, I noticed something strange. I started hearing Sarah more clearly. Her voice, her jokes, her stories, they landed differently. I wasn't listening through a fog of resentment anymore. I wasn't mentally rehearsing my next yes while she talked. I was just listening. Present. Curious. Open. That's the secret nobody tells you about language learning. You can't truly hear someone else until you can hear yourself. And you can't hear yourself until you stop saying yes to everything that silences you. The first no is the hardest. It feels like jumping off a cliff. But the cliff is an illusion. You're not jumping into emptiness. You're jumping into honesty. And honesty, it turns out, is where real listening begins. After that day, I started practicing. Small no's first, then bigger ones. Each one got easier. Each one cleared a little more space in my brain. And each one trained my ears to hear not just English words, but English meaning, the stuff underneath. But the biggest test was still coming. Because saying no to a friend is one thing. Saying no to family? To the person you married? That's a whole different kind of jump. How boundaries train my ears. You might be wondering what any of this has to do with learning English. Fair question. Because so far I've told you a lot about saying no and very little about grammar, vocabulary, or pronunciation. But here's the thing I discovered that changed everything. Boundaries didn't just save my sanity. They rewired my ears. Literally. Neurologically. in ways that no textbook, no app, no expensive course ever could. Let me explain. After my tiny victory with Sarah, I started paying close attention to my listening comprehension.
Not studying it.
Just noticing. And I noticed something strange. On days when I set even one small boundary, saying I need 10 minutes instead of sure, saying not today instead of yes, my English listening was sharper, crisper. I caught jokes. I understood song lyrics for the first time. I followed fast conversations between native speakers without getting lost. On days when I fell back into my old patterns, saying yes to everything, apologizing for existing, shrinking to make others comfortable, my listening turned to mud. Words slipped through my fingers. Accents sounded like static. I would nod and smile and have absolutely no idea what just happened. Same ears, same brain, same English level, different results. What was going on? Here's the science. Your brain has something called the reticular activating system, or RAS. Think of it as the bouncer at the door of your consciousness. It decides what information gets through and what gets filtered out. And the RAS has one boss, your emotional state. When you're stressed, anxious, or exhausted, which happens constantly when you're saying yes to everything, your RAS filters everything as potential threat. It's looking for danger, not meaning. It's listening for tone, not content. It's scanning for rejection, not connection. But when you're calm, when you've set boundaries that protect your energy, your RAS relaxes. It stops looking for tigers and starts listening like a human being. It lets in nuance, humor, emotion, subtext. It hears not just the words, but the music of the language. That's why boundaries train my ears. Not because boundaries are magic. Because boundaries create the internal conditions for real listening. I tested this theory. Consciously. Deliberately. For 3 months, I kept a journal. Every day, I wrote down one boundary I set, no matter how small, and rated my listening comprehension on a scale of 1 to 10. The pattern was undeniable. Boundary days, listening score 7, 8, 9, no boundary days, 3, 4, 5. The data was clear. My ears worked better when I protected my energy. But the real breakthrough came when I applied this to my marriage. My husband, bless his American heart, is a talker. Not in a bad way. He just processes things out loud. He'll come home from work and spend 20 minutes telling me about his day, the meeting, the email, the thing Dave said in the break room, the project that's behind schedule, the traffic, the weather, the sandwich he ate for lunch. And I would listen. Or rather, I would try to listen. But by minute 12, my brain would be screaming, I can't hold any more words. And I would start nodding blankly, thinking about what to make for dinner, wondering if I remembered to pay the electric bill. Then I would feel guilty. Then I would apologize. Then I would try harder to listen, which made me listen even worse. It was a cycle. A terrible, exhausting cycle. One night, after reading yet another book about boundaries, I was becoming slightly obsessed. I decided to try something radical. My husband started his evening debrief, and I held up my hand, like a traffic cop. He stopped mid-sentence. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. But I can't listen to all of this right now. My brain is full. Can you give me the 2-minute version? He stared at me. Then he laughed. Not a mean laugh. A surprised laugh. The 2-minute version?
Yes.
Just the headline. I want to listen. I really do. But I can't do 20 minutes. I can do 2. He thought about this for a moment. Then he said, okay. The headline is, work is busy, Dave is annoying, and I'm tired. That's it. Thank you. And then something beautiful happened. I actually listened to those 2 minutes. Fully. Deeply. I heard not just his words but his exhaustion. I heard that he didn't need me to solve anything. He just needed me to know. And because I hadn't burned out my listening muscles on 18 extra minutes of detail, I had energy left to actually hear him. The next night, he came home and said, 2 minutes. I nodded. He gave me the headline. I listened. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel resentful about his talking. I felt connected. Here's the psychology behind this. There's a concept called attentional resource theory. Basically, your brain has a limited amount of listening fuel. Once it's gone, it's gone. You can't just try harder. Trying harder when you're out of fuel is like pressing the gas pedal when the tank is empty. Nothing happens except you feel more frustrated. By setting a boundary, 2 minutes, not 20, I was conserving my listening fuel. I was using it where it mattered most. And my husband? He learned to edit. He learned that shorter actually meant more heard. Our communication got better, not worse. This is the secret that no English teacher ever told me. You don't need to understand every word. You need to understand the right words. And to find the right words, you need to protect your attention. You need boundaries. I started applying this everywhere. When my mother-in-law called and started a long story about her neighbor's cousin's dog, I would say, I'd love to hear this, but I only have 5 minutes. Can you tell me the best part? She didn't get offended. She got to the point, and I actually heard her. When a cashier at the grocery store asked me how my day was, a question Americans ask but don't actually want answered, I stopped giving the full report. I said, good. Thanks. You?
Short.
Simple. Boundaried. And I had energy left for conversations that actually mattered. My ears were changing. Not because I was doing more listening practice. Because I was doing less listening to things that drained me. And more listening to things that filled me. The results showed up in unexpected places. I started hearing the difference between I'm fine and I'm fine. That subtle tone shift that means the opposite. I started understanding sarcasm, which is the final boss of English listening. I started laughing at jokes before everyone else explained them to me. Boundaries had trained my ears by teaching my brain what to listen for. Not everything, just what matters. And the more I practiced, the better I got. Until one day, something happened that I never thought possible. I overheard a conversation between 2 strangers on the bus, fast, slangy, full of cultural references, and I understood every single word. I almost cried, right there on the bus. A grown woman, crying over a conversation about nothing, just because she could finally hear it. That was the day I knew. Boundaries weren't just helping me love myself. They were helping me speak and hear like a native. Love self first the American way? Here's something that confused me for years. Americans talk about self-care like it's a legitimate activity, right up there with breathing and eating. They'll say things like, I'm taking a mental health day, or I need to prioritize myself right now without a trace of guilt. My husband once told his boss he couldn't work late because he had plans to recharge, and his boss said, good for you. I thought this was a prank. It was not a prank. Where I come from, prioritizing yourself is called selfishness. It's called neglecting your duties. It's called being a bad daughter, a bad wife, a bad mother. The word self-care doesn't exist in my mother tongue, not as a real concept anyway. You take care of everyone else first, and if there's anything left at the end of the day, you might take a deep breath before passing out. That's not self-care. That's survival by exhaustion. So when I moved to America and saw people unapologetically saying, I need some me time, or I'm not available this weekend, I'm resting, I felt 2 things simultaneously. First, disgust. How selfish can you be? Second, envy. Burning, desperate envy. Because they had something I didn't. Permission. Permission to matter. Here's what I've learned since then. Americans aren't selfish. They just understand something that many other cultures don't. You can't give what you don't have. A burned out person is not generous. A burned out person is a ghost. They show up. They go through the motions, but they're not actually there. And everyone around them can feel it. There's actual science behind this. Researchers call it the compassion fatigue cycle. When you give and give and give without refilling your own tank, you eventually run dry. And when you're dry, you have nothing left to give anyone, not your kids, not your spouse, not your friends. You become resentful, irritable, and checked out. You might still be saying yes, but your heart is saying no. And people feel that disconnect. They'd rather have an honest no than a fake yes. I saw this clearly in my marriage. When I was constantly exhausted from saying yes to everything, I was a terrible wife. Not mean, just absent. I was there physically, but my mind was somewhere else, calculating, worrying, resenting. My husband would try to connect with me, and I'd give him the bare minimum. A grunt, a nod, a yes, sure, whatever. He didn't feel loved. He felt tolerated. And that's not love. That's hostage negotiation. But when I started setting boundaries, when I started saying no to things that drained me so I could say yes to things that filled me, something shifted. I had energy for my husband. Real energy. I laughed at his stupid jokes. I listened to his work stories without wanting to gouge my eyes out. I was present.
And he noticed.
One night, he said something that broke me open. You're different lately. Happier. Is everything okay? I said, I've been saying no to more things. So I have more yes for you. He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, I didn't know you were saying yes to things you didn't want to do. I didn't either. For years. That conversation changed our marriage. Because he finally understood that my exhaustion wasn't his fault, but it also wasn't my duty. And I finally understood that loving myself wasn't stealing from my family.
It was investing in them.
Let me give you a specific example. Every evening, after my daughter went to bed, I used to spend that time cleaning, planning, organizing, answering messages. I was productive. I was also miserable. I never had a moment that was just mine. So I decided to try something radical. I told my husband, from 8 to 8:30 every night I'm off duty. I'm going to sit in the bedroom and do absolutely nothing. You handle anything that comes up. He said, okay.
Just like that. No argument. No guilt. Just okay.
The first night, I sat on the bed and stared at the wall for 30 minutes. It was uncomfortable. My brain kept screaming, you should be doing something. This is wasteful. But I stayed. I breathed. I did nothing. And when I came out, I felt lighter. Not productive. Lighter. The second night was easier. The third night, I actually looked forward to it. Within 2 weeks, that 30 minutes had become sacred. It was the time when I wasn't a wife, a mother, an employee, or an immigrant. I was just a person sitting in a room, existing. And that existence felt like a gift I gave myself. Here's the thing about American culture that I've come to love. Americans don't ask for permission to exist. They assume they have it. They assume their time matters, their feelings matter, their needs matter. Not because they're better than anyone else. Because they were raised to believe that you can't pour from an empty cup. And that's not selfishness. That's physics. My daughter is growing up with this belief. She already says things like, I need some quiet time, and I don't want to share right now without a trace of guilt. And when she says those things, I feel proud. Not because she's being difficult. Because she's learning something I learned at 30-something. Her voice matters. Her needs matter. She doesn't have to apologize for taking up space. This is the gift that boundaries gave me. Not just better English. Not just a better marriage. A better relationship with myself. I stopped seeing self-love as a luxury and started seeing it as a necessity. I stopped treating my own needs as optional. And the world didn't end. In fact, the world got kinder. My American friends didn't judge me for saying no. They celebrated me. They said, "Good for you," and meant it. My husband didn't leave me because I took 30 minutes for myself. He respected me more. And my daughter? She's learning that a woman can say no and still be loved. She's learning that love doesn't require self-destruction. That's the American lesson I needed all along. Love yourself first isn't selfish. It's the only way to love anyone else for real. My current life. Peace over perfection. Fast forward to today. I'm sitting in that same kitchen, the one with the yellow light and the view of a postage stamp yard, and I'm drinking hot tea. Actually hot. Not cold. Because I finally learned that I'm allowed to drink my tea while it's still warm instead of reheating it 4 times while taking care of everyone else's needs first. My daughter is 6 now. She's in 1st grade. She comes home from school and tells me about her day in a mix of English and my mother tongue, switching back and forth like a tiny simultaneous interpreter. She doesn't know that's supposed to be hard. To her, it's just talking. And maybe that's the secret. Maybe the only people who think language is hard are the ones who forgot they were born knowing nothing. My husband and I have a rhythm now. Not a perfect rhythm. Perfect doesn't exist, but a working one. He knows that between 7 and 8 p.m. I'm not available for deep conversations. That's my decompression hour. I might read. I might stare at the wall. I might scroll through my phone like a zombie. He doesn't question it. He just brings me a cup of tea and leaves me alone. That tiny act, bringing tea without being asked, is his love language now. And mine is accepting it without apologizing. Here's what my current life looks like, stripped of the filters I used to wear. I work from home now.
Not a fancy job.
Data entry. But it pays for the things that matter, groceries, ballet lessons for my daughter, the occasional takeout when I'm too tired to cook. I used to think I needed a big career to be valuable. Now I know that value has nothing to do with your job title. Value is showing up for the people you love without resenting them. Value is having energy left at the end of the day. Value is not collapsing into bed, wondering where your life went. I still make mistakes. Yesterday, I said yes to something I should have said no to. A neighbor asked me to watch her cat for a week while she's on vacation. I don't like cats.
Cats don't like me.
But I said yes because she looked stressed, and I felt guilty. And then I spent the whole night regretting it. So this morning, I texted her. I'm really sorry, but I can't watch the cat. I should have said no yesterday. Can you find someone else? She was annoyed. Briefly. Then she found someone else. And I didn't die. Progress, not perfection. My English listening? It's not perfect either. I still miss things. Fast-talking teenagers on the bus still sound like they're speaking a different language. Regional accents still throw me off. Sometimes I laugh at a joke 2 seconds after everyone else because my brain needed an extra beat to process the punchline. But here's the difference. I don't panic anymore. I don't freeze. I don't feel like a failure. When I miss something, I just say, "Sorry, can you say that again?" And people do, without judgment. Because most humans are kind. And the ones who aren't? They're not my problem. The biggest change is internal. I used to listen with my shoulders up around my ears, bracing for something to go wrong. Now I listen with my shoulders down, relaxed, curious. Like I'm leaning into a conversation instead of defending against it. There's a concept in linguistics called affective filtering. It's the emotional filter that either lets language in or blocks it out. When you're anxious, your affective filter is like a brick wall. When you're calm, it's like a screen door. Things can pass through. My effective filter used to be a fortress. Now, it's a garden gate. Not wide open, that would be chaos, but open enough to let the good stuff in. How did I get here? Small steps. Daily practice. Not of English. Of boundaries. Every morning, I ask myself one question. What do I need today? Not what does everyone else need. Not what should I do. Just what do I need? Sometimes the answer is coffee. Sometimes it's 15 minutes of silence before my daughter wakes up. Sometimes it's permission to do nothing. And then I give myself that thing. Without guilt. Without negotiation. Just here you go, you matter. This morning I needed to write. So I woke up an hour early, made tea, and sat down at this keyboard. My husband handled breakfast. My daughter got herself dressed, mostly. And I wrote. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped treating my own desires as selfish and started treating them as information. My daughter is watching all of this. She's learning. The other day, a friend at school asked to borrow her favorite marker. She said, "Not this one. You can have the blue one."
Clear, direct, kind.
The friend took the blue marker. No drama. My daughter didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She just stated her boundary and moved on. I almost cried in the pickup line. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not perfect English. Not a spotless house. Not a Pinterest-worthy life. A daughter who knows she's allowed to say no. A husband who knows that my no's make my yes stronger. A life where peace matters more than perfection. Do I still struggle?
Yes.
Of course. I'm human. Some days I fall back into old patterns, apologizing, shrinking, saying yes when I mean no.
But those days are fewer now.
And when they happen, I don't beat myself up. I just notice. Reset. Try again tomorrow. This is the American life I finally chose. Not the one where I'm a super immigrant who works twice as hard to prove she belongs. Not the one where I'm a perfect wife who never complains and a perfect mother who never gets tired. Just a regular person, living a regular life, in a regular house, with regular struggles and regular joys. And you know what? Regular is enough. Regular is beautiful. Regular is the thing I was running from for years, not realizing it was the only thing I ever really wanted. My ears are open now, not because I mastered English, because I finally stopped fighting myself. And when you stop fighting yourself, you have energy left to listen. Really listen. The happily ever after is real. Let me tell you something that might sound like a lie. After all those years of saying yes, shrinking, apologizing, and feeling like a ghost in my own life, I am genuinely happy now. Not the fake happy I used a plaster on my face for family photos. Not the desperate happy of someone trying to convince themselves everything is fine. Real happy. The kind that sits quietly in your chest like a cat curled up on a warm blanket. It doesn't need to announce itself. It just exists. I used to think happy endings only happened in movies. You know the formula. Meet cute, conflict, resolution, credits roll. But real life doesn't have credits. Real life keeps going after the music stops. And that's where the real happy ending lives. Not in a single moment, but in the thousands of small moments that follow. So let me describe my happily ever after. Not as a fairy tale. As a Tuesday. Last Tuesday, I woke up before my alarm. Not because I was anxious. Because my body was rested. Imagine that. Rested. I lay in bed for 5 extra minutes, listening to the birds outside my window. The birds in my neighborhood are loud. They have opinions. I used to hate them because they woke me up. Now I listen to them and think, at least someone is having a good morning. I made coffee. Real coffee. Not the leftover from yesterday coffee I used to drink because I didn't have time to make fresh. I ground the beans. I waited for the water to boil. I poured it slowly, watching the steam curl up like a little celebration. This took 7 minutes. 7 minutes that I used to think were wasted. Now I know they're the opposite of wasted. They're the point. My daughter woke up and came downstairs with her hair looking like she'd been in a wind tunnel. She asked for pancakes.
I said yes.
But here's the difference. I said yes because I actually wanted to make pancakes, not because I was afraid of her disappointment. I made the pancakes slowly. I let her pour the syrup herself, which meant most of it ended up on the table. I didn't clean it up right away. I sat down and ate my pancakes while they were still hot. Revolutionary concept. My husband came down, kissed my head, and said, "You look peaceful." I said, "I feel peaceful." Then we did the ordinary things. School drop-off, work, grocery shopping,
Dinner.
bath time.
Bedtime.
Nothing dramatic. Nothing worth, not a single moment of resentment. Not a single whispered, "I'll do it myself because it's easier."
Not a single apology for existing.
Just presence. Just a woman who finally learned that she's allowed to take up space. You might be wondering about my marriage. Because in the movies, the happy ending always involves a grand romantic gesture, a speech, a kiss in the rain, a last-minute airport dash. Real life is less cinematic. My husband and I don't have grand gestures.
We have small ones.
He brings me tea without being asked. I don't snap at him when he forgets to take out the trash. He says, "I see you," and I say, "I see you too," and we both know what that means. We still argue. Of course we argue. Last week, we had a fight about where to go for vacation. He wanted the beach. I wanted the mountains. We went back and forth for 20 minutes, getting nowhere. Then I said, "I need a break from this conversation. Let's talk about it tomorrow." He said okay. The next day, we both had clearer heads. We ended up choosing somewhere in the middle, a lake house. Neither of us got exactly what we wanted. Both of us got something we could live with. That's not compromise. That's respect. And respect only exists when boundaries exist. Here's what I've learned about love, the real kind. Love without boundaries is not love. It's dependency. It's two people clinging to each other because they're afraid of being alone. But love with boundaries? That's two whole people choosing each other. Not because they need to, because they want to. My husband and I are whole people now. Not perfect. Not finished. Just whole. He has his hobbies.
Ihemin.
He says no to me sometimes. I say no to him sometimes. And neither of us falls apart. Because we know that a no to one thing is a yes to something else. He says no to watching a movie with me because he's tired, and that's a yes to waking up refreshed tomorrow. I say no to going to his work party because I'm socially drained, and that's a yes to being present for our daughter's bedtime. This is the happy ending I didn't know I was fighting for. Not a marriage without conflict. A marriage where conflict doesn't destroy us. Not a life without stress. A life where stress doesn't own me. And my daughter? She's growing up in a house where boundaries are normal. Where no one apologizes for having needs. Where love is not a transaction but a choice. The other day, she came home from school and said, "Mom, a boy in my class asked to copy my homework." I said no. He got mad. But I didn't feel bad. I asked, "Why didn't you feel bad?" She said, "Because it's my homework. He can do his own." That's a 6-year-old. 6. She already knows something I didn't learn until I was in my 30s. Her boundaries are not mean. They're just true. If that's the only thing I ever teach her, my life was worth it. So here I am, sitting in my kitchen, Tea is hot. Daughter is asleep. Husband is watching something on his laptop with headphones on. The house is quiet. Not the empty quiet of loneliness. The full quiet of peace. I still listen to English every day.
Podcasts, audiobooks, YouTube videos.
But I don't listen to learn anymore. I listen because I'm curious. I listen because I want to know what people are saying, not because I'm afraid of missing something. My ears are open. My shoulders are down. My heart is steady. The woman who couldn't say no, who apologized for spoons, who cried in parking lots and hid in bathrooms, she's not gone. She's part of me, but she's not driving anymore. She's in the passenger seat. And the person behind the wheel finally knows where she's going. Not because she has a map, because she finally trusts herself to choose the turns. That's the happy ending. Not arriving somewhere perfect. Learning to enjoy the drive. Your first no in English starts today.
So here we are.
The end of the story. Or rather, the beginning of yours. Because I didn't tell you all of this, so you could admire my journey. I told you, so you could start your own.
Today. Right now.
In the next 5 minutes. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you said no to something you didn't want to do? Not in your head. Not in a fantasy where you're brave and confident. Out loud. In real life. To a real person. If you're like I was, the answer might be never, or I don't remember, or I tried once and it went terribly. That's okay. That's not a failure. That's just where you are. And where you are is exactly where you need to be to start. Here's what I want you to do. Not tomorrow. Not next week.
Today.
I want you to pick one tiny thing to say no to. Not a big thing. Not a life-changing thing. Just a small, insignificant thing that you normally say yes to out of habit or fear. Maybe it's a second cup of coffee you don't actually want. No, thank you. I'm good. Maybe it's an extra 5 minutes of scrolling on your phone before bed. No, I'm going to sleep now. Maybe it's a colleague asking for help when you're already overloaded. I can't right now. Ask me tomorrow. That's it. That's the whole exercise. One tiny no. In English if you can. In your mother tongue if you need to. The language doesn't matter at first. What matters is the muscle. And like any muscle, it grows with use. There's science behind this. Psychologists call it behavioral activation. The idea is simple. You don't wait until you feel brave to act brave. You act brave, and the feeling follows. Your brain learns by doing. Every time you say a small no, you're literally rewiring the neural pathways that make saying no easier next time. It's not magic. It's biology. I remember my first tiny no. It wasn't to Sarah about the soccer practice. That came later. My first tiny no was to myself. I was standing in front of the refrigerator, exhausted, about to cook dinner even though I had nothing left. And I said out loud to no one, "No, I'm not cooking tonight. We're ordering pizza." My husband looked at me like I'd grown a second head. Then he said, "Okay, what kind?" That was it. The world didn't end. The pizza was delicious. After that, I started practicing on small things. No, I don't want to watch that show. No, I can't talk right now. No, I need 5 minutes alone. Each no was like a small weightlifting repetition. At first, my no voice was shaky and quiet. But with practice, it got stronger, clearer, more confident. And here's the beautiful part. As my no got stronger, my English listening got better. Not because I was studying, because I stopped spending so much mental energy on managing other people's feelings. That energy was freed up for listening. Real listening. The kind where you hear not just words, but meaning. You want to train your ears like a native? Stop saying yes to everything. That's the secret. That's the masterclass. Everything else is just details. Let me give you 3 English phrases to start with. 3 tiny no's that you can practice today. Write them down. Put them on your phone. Stick them on your bathroom mirror. Number 1. I need to think about that. This is the gentlest no. It's not a rejection. It's a pause. It gives you time to decide what you actually want instead of saying yes out of pressure. Practice saying it now. I need to think about that.
See?
Not scary. Number 2. That doesn't work for me. This one is clearer. It states your boundary without explaining or apologizing. You don't need to justify why it doesn't work. It just doesn't. Can you stay late tonight? That doesn't work for me.
Done.
Number 3. I'm not available for that. This is your strong no. Use it when you're sure. It's honest, direct, and respectful. It doesn't leave room for negotiation. Can you help me move this weekend? I'm not available for that.
Short. Clear. Done.
Practice these phrases in the mirror. Say them to your dog. Say them to your reflection. Record yourself on your phone and listen back. Get comfortable with the sound of your own no, because that sound is the sound of your freedom. I know this is hard. I know your body might shake. I know your brain might scream, they'll hate you. They'll leave. You're being selfish. That's just your old programming. That's the voice of a version of you who learned that love requires self-destruction. That version was wrong. Love requires boundaries. Love requires honesty. Love requires a you who is still standing at the end of the day. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to have needs. You are allowed to say no without a 20-minute explanation. You are allowed to exist without apologizing. And here's the thing about English. It's not a test you're failing. It's not a mountain you need to conquer. It's just a tool. A tool for connecting, for expressing, for living. And like any tool, it works better when the person holding it is calm, grounded, and honest. So start with the no's. The small ones. The tiny ones. The ones that feel ridiculous to even call a boundary. Start there. And watch what happens. Watch your shoulders drop. Watch your breathing slow. Watch your ears open. Because when you stop saying yes to everything that drains you, you make room for the things that fill you. And when you're filled, you can finally hear, not just the words, the music underneath. That's the journey I took. That's the journey you're starting today. And I promise you, from the other side of it, from this kitchen with the yellow light and the hot tea and the quiet peace, it's worth it. Every no is a yes to yourself. And every yes to yourself is a step toward fluency. Not just in English. In being alive. You just watched me go from a woman who apologized for dropping a spoon to someone who can say no without losing love. But here's the truth I didn't tell you yet. This journey, it never ends. Every single day, I wake up and choose my boundaries again. Some days I fail. Some days I cry in the car. But I never go back to being that ghost. So let me leave you with one question. The same question my daughter asked me that changed everything. What are you saying yes to right now that is secretly killing your voice? Don't answer in the comments. Answer in your life. Because here's what I know for sure. Your English isn't weak. Your boundaries are. And once you fix that, your ears will open like they never have before. If this story touched something in you, even a tiny crack, then you belong here. I make new videos every week. Real stories. Real English. Real boundaries. Don't just watch this one and leave.
Subscribe.
Turn on the bell. Because the next story I tell, it might be the one that finally gives you permission to say your first real no. See you in the next video. Same kitchen. Same yellow light. New truth. Subscribe for weekly stories that train your ears and your heart.